Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 7th episode of Bright Garden Voices. My name is Diego Ardoan, and I am one of the co-founders of this project. Bright Garden Voices is a grassroots initiative which provides a platform for constructive dialogue between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. We host online meetings where guests from both sides share their experiences and ideas relating to the Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict or any other matter relating to the two nations. Our meetings also include live interaction with our audience, and the meetings are recorded and made available on YouTube and as a podcast afterwards. Bright Garden Voices is not affiliated with nor funded by any organization or government, and it does not purport to represent any nation, state, or group. Today, Liera Action will be replacing me as a co-host for this meeting, so I'd like to invite her to present herself.
Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Liera, and I was actually not born in Armenia or Azerbaijan, but I was actually born in Dagestan in the Russian North Caucasus, but I lived in the US most of my life. So a little background about me: I'm a marketer and a culture writer, and also a community organizer. And I founded a Facebook group called Kavkazi Jewish History and Culture, which focuses on preserving the history of mountain Jews, or Juhuro, of the Eastern Caucasus, including Dagestan and Azerbaijan. And I got involved in discourse on the Artsakh-Karabakh conflict due to friends and group members who are affected by it. So I believe in dialogue and definitely would like to help humanize each nation in the eyes of the other. So I'm really excited to be here in general. And now I'll go ahead and give the floor to Rauf, my co-host, to introduce himself.
Thank you, Lara. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our 7th meeting. My name is Rauf Mamadov. I'm also from Azerbaijan. I'm born and raised in Sumgait, Azerbaijan, but now residing in Washington, D.C., United States. By profession, I'm an energy expert. I work for think tanks and research organizations, and I specialize on energy geopolitics. But I'm passionate about building dialogue between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. I am a permanent co-host, hopefully permanent co-host in the program, but I'm the last one to join Diego and Arnold, and I replaced Aidan, who was also one of the 3 founders of the project. Any Azerbaijani or Armenian who has gone through these conflicts, and in my personal experience, I've gone through 2 wars. I believe that communication is key to find resolution to the conflict. It's one of the factors that could contribute, and that's why I'm passionate about the project, and hopefully we'll have more than 1 platforms. Again, thank you, and I will now like to give the floor to Arnold to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I am Arnold Alabadian. I'm doing my PhD in history, and I'm joining from the United States. I am one of the co-founders and co-hosts at Bright Garden, and I will just keep my introduction short since I've done it so many times. So moving on to today's episode. Today's meeting concerns individuals of mixed Armenian-Azerbaijani backgrounds. Throughout the centuries, the Caucasus has been a melting pot of cultures, ethnicities, and languages. During the Soviet era especially, it was not uncommon for marriages between Armenians and Azerbaijanis to take place in Azerbaijan or Armenia. Such unions and the offsprings of such unions are still to be found in parts of the Caucasus and in various countries throughout the world. Our 2 guests today, both being part Armenian and part Azerbaijani in descent, describe their personal and family experiences and their views about the conflict. Now let us go to Rauf for the agenda.
Thank you, Arnold. Now, Diego introduced the project, and we, as moderators, have already introduced ourselves. Now, let's move on to the discussion with to the agenda of what we're gonna do. First, we will have a discussion with our guests. We'll ask them questions. Then we'll open the virtual floor for to the audience for the questions. You can ask your questions in our chat, but I would also encourage you to send your questions to Arnold, who is responsible for receiving the questions today. At the end, after the Q&A section, we'll end the meeting with a few closing remarks. And lastly, the meeting will be recorded and made available online. If you don't want your name on record, you can use your first name or any other names that you would prefer. That's about today's agenda, and let's go to Lara, and Lara will talk about the house rules.
Yes, so are we going into the next slide for house rules? Yes, great. So as you can see on the screen, we have some basic house rules for these meetings that I hope everybody will respect. I'm sure everybody will, but we have to do this to make sure that we're all on the same page. So we do not tolerate insults, disrespectful language, generalizations about any ethnicity, and no denialism of trauma or events. We call for you to empathize with each other and not to accuse each other. Every participant is the only one responsible for what they say, and they are not here to represent their government or nation. Remember that we are not here to agree with each other, and it's more than okay to disagree. We're simply here to listen and engage with the dialogue here. So I'll now go on into introducing our two guests. So I'll introduce the first one. So our first guest is Julian Sanders. He's a PhD student and researcher in energy and environmental law. He's interested in politics, urbanism, and analog photography. Julian was born in Berlin, Germany, to an Armenian and Azerbaijani mother and to a Jewish father. And I'll go ahead to Ralph for introducing our second guest, Marat.
So our second hero is Marat. Marat was born in Baku, but raised in Seattle. He currently lives in LA, Los Angeles. Marat is 32. He's a billing analyst and a former philosophy student, but currently back in the University for Political Sciences. He's also has roots in both ethnic groups, but he's half Azerbaijani, half Armenian, and he has agreed to talk to us today and to share his history. I think we'll go to our first questions now, and I think it's my turn to ask the first question. So what we're gonna do is we'll ask the question to both our guests, and we'll have Marat answer first and Julian follow up on the same question. And so the first question is, so what is your family history, guys? Can you tell us more about, your background and about, you know, your ethnic background and your cultural background, please? Marat, go first.
Thank you. Once again, I appreciate you guys inviting me on. So 3 out of 4 of my grandparents were born in Baku. From my mother's side, my Azerbaijani side, both my grandparents were born in Baku, but each of their parents were from different places. So her father's parents were from Agbidi, and her mother's side was from Shamaki. My grandmother on my Armenian side was born in Baku. Her parents had migrated there shortly before that. They were actually Armenians from northwestern Iran in the Karadagh and Ardabil area. And then my grandpa from my Armenian side was the only one who wasn't born there. He was born in Artsakh, in a small village in the Shushi province. He was born in 1903. There's a very large gap between myself and him. So he was a teenager during the Russian Revolution, and he ended up joining the Soviet army and working his way up both through military and the party. So he ended up being moved to Baku through that and settling there. He had also served in World War II, so he had worked a pretty good reputation for himself and position, and so Baku was where he planted his roots. And met my grandmother, of course. Both of my parents were born in Baku and raised there. They had always spoke fondly about Baku. I remember, you know, I have friends from all over the former Soviet Union, and they, you know, there's certainly a variance in how some of our parents remember life in the USSR. So while some of my friends would describe it in a bit more bleak terms, I remember always thinking, like, I never heard this part at all. Like it sounded a lot more positive from how my parents described it. And that's really just how they were describing Baku. My parents, I'd probably best describe them as big city cosmopolitans from the Soviet Union. Like, I know my dad loved living in Baku. He was always very proud of Baku Armenians and their achievements there, and also just loved Baku as a standout Soviet city. So when they started dating in maybe like the early 80s, 1983, that at that time, their mixed ethnic heritage wasn't that big of a deal for the context of the Soviet Union. So they had no reason to foresee what was going to happen by the end of that decade. So at that time, probably wasn't even any sort of thought. And I was born in June of 1989. And of course, by then, things had reached a fever pitch in the city. So my father and my grandmother, his mom, had left Baku, I want to say like in December of 1989. So I was only just a couple months old. I stayed back in Baku with my mom and my other grandmother. And for the next couple of years, we were back and forth between Baku and Moscow. Moscow is where my dad and grandmother left to. And so we would come visit them every couple months or so. And we had already known we were immigrating to the US at this point. So it was just short visits. We'd come back, and then we were in Moscow permanently by 1992. And then in 1993, we came to the US. We were supposed to settle in Austin, Texas, actually, which is crazy for me to think about now. But my grandma had a friend who was living in Seattle, and she let her know there's a handful of Bakinsid that are settling in Seattle, and you guys should think about coming here. So she ended up sponsoring us, and we came to Seattle. At Seattle's Armenian community was almost entirely Baku Armenians at that time, and it was a nice little Bakinsid community. It was mostly Armenians. There were some Azerbaijanis, there were some Gorsky Jews, but I'll get into it on one of the following questions. But it was just a great community to grow up in.
That's a great journey. I actually heard that many Armenians had the same path when they were emigrating from Baku. It was Moscow was like a transition point, and then from there they just went either to Europe or to the United States. Thank you for
Samariat Baku Moskva, literally.
Yeah, Baku Moskva. let's hear Julian's story. Let's see how
Yeah.
Here.
I will try to be as detailed as Marat, but let's see. I was born 1993 in Berlin, already in Germany. That means already in the in the middle of the war. My father is Jewish. He comes from the, I suppose, well-known in Soviet circles, well-known city of Odessa, at the Black Sea, and that he's fully Jewish. The grandparents were both born shortly before the war, and then also were in evacuation when the Nazis were approaching. My mother was born in Baku, as I suppose for many people here, and also for Marat. My mother was born in Baku to Azerbaijani father and Armenian mother. My grandpa, he has ancestry from Shamakhe, as well as Marat has ancestry from Shamakhe, but he himself was already the second question. Nah, he himself was born directly in Isheri Sheher in Baku, like really in the old town, and he also is very emotional exactly about this old town. And I really remember once there was the Formula One race in Baku old town, and that's when my grandpa was sitting for hours at the television just to see those pictures of the old town. I very well remember that. My grandma was also born in Baku. Her mother, again, that means my grandmother, is actually from Goris, Armenia, and it's quite, I would say, they had all very Soviet CVs, upper middle class. Grandpa was also still here in Germany. He's now in pension. Was a surgeon and had a good job in the Baku hospital. Grandma, as also her father, was a lecturer in history, Soviet history of the Soviet of the Communist Party, and already the grandmother from Goris, she was allowed as one of the first in the family to study. That is very, very long ago. I also cannot know precisely date it, but the family was they were expropriated when in the early Soviet time in Armenia, and first she could not study, and then after a law was the constitution was changed in the Soviet Union, also those people who were once the wealthy, the rich ones, also were now able to study. So she studied chemistry. In my opinion, when I think how it was for women, and even here in Germany where I am, that's quite impressive, I would say, for this time. Yeah, both grandfathers participated in World War II, both my Azeri grandfather and my Armenian grandfather. There were no, of course, in this time, they really had other things to worry about than their national issues amongst the Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Yeah, what is interesting, also, Marat spoke about it, when they married, my grandma and my grandpa, there were, of course, in the family some, like, parents were not very happy, let's say so. But I asked many questions on that, and it turned out the parents were simply not very happy because they thought she shouldn't marry yet, she should study, and in general. This national issue, it was an issue, but it came on top. It came on top, and it was not the decisive matter. In the end of the day, my grandpa and his mother-in-law, my grandmother, had a very good relationship, also till my grandmother died in 1997. So it was always kind of hanging there, this national issue, but it also was never decisive, and it was never separating when it became serious. And when it became serious in 1990 in Baku, it was clear that everybody is leaving together, and people left, as it seems here untypically, but they left directly to Berlin, where they had friends, and settled then in some refugee camp here in eastern Germany, what was some days before still the GDR, and was currently in transition. Still got even GDR passports. And then my parents met also in this camp because my father came from Odessa in 1990. And that's how I'm here. Yeah, I would say other issues will be covered in the next questions. Yes, and as I see here, the pictures, I also have forgotten to say that grandfather's ancestry was from Shushi. They had to escape there in the pogrom in 1920, which was part of the same conflict very, very long time ago, over 100 years ago. Yeah.
Thank you, Julian. And I will have Lera ask the next question, but I can already tell that both you and Marat have roots in Shamakhi and Shushar, right? So you guys are double yerli, or Zimlyak, as we call it.
Double yerli.
So Lera, please.
Double yerli. Okay.
All right, thank you for that, Ralph. And thank you to both Marat and Julian for your really detailed answers, I think we really get a nice picture about both of your family histories and a little bit of the nuance between the relationships in your family. So the next question is, how do you identify? So how do you identify, and has the way that you identified changed with your age, experience, and also where you're located? Because we also have Marat is in the US on the West Coast, and Julian grew up in Germany. So maybe if we can have the same structure, so Marat can answer the question first, and then we can go to Julian.
Yeah, of course. So I'll say from an American perspective, my identity can be kind of fluid. Growing up, and even somewhat in my adulthood, I was always seen as a Russian kid by Americans. And I can kind of understand that. I mean, if you ask some of my old coworkers back in Seattle, to this day, they'd probably just say they thought I was Russian, because, you know, someone has Russian clientele. Whenever we have Russian customers, they come and see me, so they just think, okay, that guy's just Russian. But even growing up, in Seattle, as I mentioned, it's not LA, of course, right? There's not a large Armenian community. We had a small Bakinci community, but a fairly larger general Russian-speaking former Soviet community, and we kind of fit into that. So a lot of my friends came from there. And so from an American perspective, I was just seen as generally Russian, right? But in terms of my own identity, from my own eyes, when I was a kid, well, first I'll say nowadays I'll just identify as both. If I'm speaking to someone who's familiar with the region, I'll just say both. If I'm speaking with an American outside of LA, it's like a 50-50 shot. They even know Armenia. So then you think, okay, is it even worth it to get into Azerbaijan? Probably not. So you just leave it at one. But I identify as both. When I was a kid, the cool thing was within our community, this was the early 90s, right? So this was right in the thick of the first war. But it speaks to when people immigrate to a new country, you're just trying to find your footing. You're trying to find a social network. I'm not trying to say that people just were completely colorblind in our community about who was Armenian, who was Azerbaijani. No, of course not. But nationalism did not dictate the relationships people had. None of the families were like, oh, hey, his parents are Azerbaijani, you can't hang out with him. None of that happened. We all went to the same weddings. We all went to the same house parties and gatherings. We all had kebab and hashlama on the table. Our parents listened to boka and chanson music, all the same. So anyway, what I'm saying is when I was a kid, I remember just thinking everybody was Armenian because that was my understanding of what that identity was. I remember it was actually some time had passed before I was old enough to realize, oh, this person's actually not even Armenian, they're Azerbaijani, or this person is Gorski Jew, or that person is Lezgin, because we all just were the same. We were part of one community and we were all just Bakinci. So in terms of my identity, it wasn't so strongly nationally driven. I remember there was an age when my grandma took me to Armenian church a few times. We weren't really a church-going family, but she just wanted me to engage with kind of direct Armenian culture. And so that was her way of doing it. But beyond that, it was largely unspoken. And so all these years, you know, for all the people that moved from Baku in the early 90s in Seattle, the kids all knew each other. Our parents were all friends. Everybody did business with each other, business partners, or just helping each other out. So it was just a great community and wonderful to be a part of.
And so thank you for that, Marat. So we'll go ahead and move on to Julian. Again, the questions are, how do you identify, and has that changed with your age, experience, and location?
Before I forget it, I have here kind of the privilege to speak after Marat, so I can already, how to say, interact. for me, it was exactly the opposite. Actually, in my childhood, after thinking that everybody is, I don't know, Jewish, which was obviously my father's part, and the other part, I was thinking that everybody's from Baku and everybody's Azerbaijan. As a child, I did not understand the complexity, honestly, of my ancestry. And still, if I describe it to somebody here in Germany, where I'm currently living, I'm from Berlin. Now I'm currently living in Bavaria, which is even more homogeneous. Like, people are mostly German, after all. And when I describe this, Jewish and Armenian and Azerbaijani, and people are rather confused, and it's difficult to understand and to imagine, and where is that even? And I suppose you guys in the US have the same issues. But I myself, yeah, I grew up in a Turkish influenced neighborhood of my city, and I didn't even understand it. I do have something in common also with those people here who speak Turkish, kind of. That all came way later, and I would say, if I had to describe, yeah, first I thought we were, of course, from outside perceived as Russians, because we are all Russian speaking at home. Both my father's part, okay, somebody spoke Yiddish there, but that's a long time ago. And on my mother's part as well, they were all Russian speaking. We have fought a lot against that. And I have fought a lot against this perception Russian, because that's not even, I don't see it as bad, but we're not Russians. Yeah, then I first thought that I'm Jewish. Then I thought that everybody on mother's side is Azerbaijani. And then later I only started to really discover all those complex lines and differences, and also discovered this Armenian part of my family and of my ancestry and of myself. And also I managed also to get contact with Armenian relatives thanks to internet and social media, which appeared simply, you know, and then it was not anymore half of month's salary to call somebody in Yerevan, but one could just write. The same connection to my relatives in Azerbaijan who still are there, I don't have, but it's rather to family issues, and that's a pity. But it's like, again, has nothing to do with nationality and so on. Here in Berlin, the community is small, even though we are a very, very mixed city. The Armenian and Azerbaijani communities are small, and people rather know each other. My grandparents have friends who are Azerbaijanis, and it has never played a role. And it has never played a role, even though they have become friends exactly in the 90s. That means only some few years after this whole war. And yeah, and if I now think of that, that's very interesting, and that's impressive. But I also cannot deny that there were some pressure, that there were some issues. There was conflict, but you know, it got better again. It got worse. It got better. Now I do feel, I think identity is also a bit shaped by what you encounter in life, and I had some unpleasant moments when a Turkish girl from my school, with whom I was quite good, honestly, started to deny the genocide, and I was like, okay, we shouldn't move on speaking now, and this was a bit disappointing, personally disappointing. I would say this also contributed a bit to my Armenian identity, and this current war certainly did too. And I always say, yeah, maybe when I was in the same age in the 90s, maybe it would have all been totally different, because, you know, then the conflict it went a different direction, and the sides and the power was differently distributed. But I think in the end of the day, I identify more Armenian than Azerbaijani, which has nothing to do with my connection to my grandparents. It's equal, but maybe it's simply the solidarity inside me, because this Armenian side was always poorly represented in my family. Yeah, that's in a nutshell. That is it in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Julian. And you touched on something that I was a little bit curious about. Was you both described your childhoods and how that identity, you know, grew as you got older, but I was curious about kind of the last year with the recent flare-up, if anything had changed, and you touched on that pretty well. So that was really interesting to hear. So thank you to you both. I'll go ahead and move over to Rauf in the interest of time.
Yeah, and we'll come back to the last year, I think, in the next questions. And
Yes.
so, but I just want to say that both of your lives are subject for detailed research.
Yes.
And the fact that you guys are so educated and consciously living and experiencing this, it's amazing. And there are a lot of things for us to learn as well, being an immigrant, and especially in my case, I have two kids growing up in a different society, so identity matter always comes. But I'm gonna get to the next question, and I'll have you guys elaborate on that. This is more about your daily life. How has being of mixed heritage influenced your life in your daily life? And could you please talk more about that?
So I was thinking, and I'm not sure how much it's influenced my daily life, like just day to day. I mean, oh, this is a picture of my grandparents and dad. In the first picture, you have my grandparents to the right, and the little kid is my father. On the picture on the right, that's also my dad as a toddler with my grandma. But back to the question, it's like in regards to the conflict, I think being mixed, even from a young age, because my parents didn't necessarily shield me from it. I was well aware of the context of the way we left and why we left and what was going on. But that helped me, even from a young age, look at the conflict as a political one rather than a civilizational clash between two people that are mortal enemies that will never get along. Because in my own home, my mom and dad get along. Here in Seattle, we have friends that are both Armenian and Azerbaijani. So growing up in that, you don't grow up thinking these two people are just always going to be at war. But in terms of like on a personal level of the way it influences me, I don't even know if it's being ethnically mixed or just my philosophy training, but I've always just looked for the gray area in everything. And even in my own studies, as I get older from politics and history, I am very skeptical of one-sided narratives. So I would say that's the biggest influence on me. That's a major issue in this conflict because you have two communities that are very insulated from each other. And that's even the case in the online discourse. There's just not a whole lot of engagement or personal experience. So what happens is you create an echo chamber, and these perpetuate into unquestioned narratives that each side has. And so then when there are attempts at dialogue, they're looked down upon because they're seen as a disgrace or capitulation. And that's why a platform like this catches flack, because people are either uncomfortable with hearing things that may challenge their narrative, or they just look at it as giving in. So I give Ralph and Arno all the credit in the world. I know that in these two countries, it's not easy to be seen as someone who's open to dialogue, unless it's, the other person is just ready to take their pants off and roll over and say, you guys were right, we were the ones 100% wrong. And that's just unrealistic. I don't think it's fair to set the standard as you have to be completely lacking in any sense of national pride before I can even think about talking to you. So
thank you for the credit. And Dan, of course, Aidan was the one who started it, and also credit to her and Diego for organizing it. Please, Julian, now.
In matters of time, Marat has said a lot of very good stuff, and a lot of stuff I just agree to, and I see the same. I think, the question is, how does it influence you? And I think it makes you. Yeah, here we see some pictures. On the left, there's my grandma with me, and on the right, there's my grandfather with me in the same flat in Berlin in 1995 or something. I think it constitutes you as a person, and I cannot imagine it otherwise. Sometimes I'm a bit envious of people who, you know, are not mixed, because it makes stuff a bit easier, you know, like it makes stuff really easier, but it doesn't mean it makes it better. But you're in the you know what's a dilemma then, like you really know, because to some part you also are the personification of it, like you're constantly living it, and I also know it. Like my grandparents, they also always lived like a bit and live still antagonistic, like and when they really met each other, then they can also, I don't know, use some nationality concerned insult or something like that really happens. And but on the other side, but that's kind of also touching the fourth question, is of course a blessing also, and it's difficult to explain to people, and yeah, and for me, of course, comes also that I'm here in Germany, and I was born and raised here in Germany, and I also cannot not say that I'm also identifying very much as a German. Like I grew up in this mentality, socialized here, so there's a lot of stuff mixed in, and yeah, that simply is me.
Seems like there's
I'll keep it short on this side. Yeah.
A big way that you can kind of view all of the different nuances of each of your identities. And Julian, I'll take that cue kind of to go into the next question, since you did touch on question number 4, which is, have you had any sort of inconveniences for being mixed? And what would you think are some aspects of some of the positive aspects of it? And I know that we started with Julian because he started to touch on it, but let's go back to Marat real quick, and then move over back to Julian. So any sort of specific details about inconveniences? We've kind of talked broadly about it, but if you have some examples from your life that would maybe offer us some insight.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a question I very often get, because that's how people perceive somebody that's being Armenian and Azerbaijani, as what they're facing very often in a home like that. My parents fight, but not for being Armenian and Azerbaijani. They fight because they've been married for 35 years. So thankfully, it doesn't come to that. Sometimes there are jokes thrown, or as Julian mentioned, you know, that's a little gun, that's a bullet in the holster that you can always throw out there, but it doesn't happen that much, and when it does, it's pretty benign. In terms of inconveniences living in LA, people are always shocked to hear that I never have any inconveniences. It's really only online where the people are rude about it. But in LA, people are very cool about it. I would say it's mostly a generation thing. So people who are 35 or 40 years old and up, they aren't that, or people that grew up in the Soviet Union and understand what the demographics of it was in the big cities. It's not really that shocking or surprising to them, or they don't think that much of it. It's usually people that are younger than me who are like, what? How does that work? Or how did that happen? But when I meet people here or talk to people here, whether it was my in-laws or just all the friends and acquaintances I met in LA or other places, people are, you know, they'll ask about it. They're kind of curious, but it's never really that big of a deal. If anything, sometimes older people will start off by telling me a positive experience they've had with an Azerbaijani, which, you know, they don't have to do, but I've always appreciated it because I just saw it as their way of telling me they're not hostile towards me for that. And it speaks to kind of on a human level, you know, we as humans are wired to treat people well, right? If someone's in front of us, they're being polite to you. It's evolutionary. You know, why would you be rude to them? It's just simply a smart survival strategy to treat people well that are treating you well. It's online where it's different, because online are no longer a sentient being in front of them. You're just a name on a screen. And at that point, you're not a person that's in front of them that you're directly dealing with. It's very impersonal, and now you represent an idea or a collective. So the interactions online and in person are very different. So that's my experience kind of in my adult life. In terms of actual inconveniences, I'll have to talk about when I was a toddler in Baku, because of what was going on at the time. So when I think of inconveniences for me, the most serious ones are from that time. So when we were traveling between Baku and Moscow, my mom would practice with me so that if anyone asked me my name, I would say Меня зовут Murat Guliev, which is my mom's last name. So there was already fears about stuff like that, and so these were very real concerns, and so they took steps like that to make sure nothing happened. So and these are kind of funnier, but actually just extremely serious, despite being funny. But my grandma, my Armenian grandma, she would always say Janit Matah to me. That's just a phrase that she used. And as a kid, you learn a phrase and you repeat it. So on one particular time, we're flying to Moscow from Baku, and on the plane, I just decided to start repeating this phrase over and over. So we're on a plane full of Azerbaijanis, and my mom's 3-year-old kid is just repeating an Armenian phrase over again loudly. So that was one that my parents always tell me, because that was just speaks to how insane the atmosphere of that time was. Another time, and Rauf, you'll like the story. My mom was at the dentist, and I was there with her, and I was just sitting on a chair while she was being worked on, and an Azerbaijani man was kind of sitting nearby, and he's asking me, "Hey, like little boy, are you Azerbaijani?" And my mom is like nervous because she can't even talk because they're working like in her mouth, right? And so I'm just sitting silent. I'm not even responding to him. And he goes, I said, do you speak Azerbaijani? Are you Azerbaijani? And I'm still silent. And finally he gets mad and he's like, "Hey boy, I'm talking to you. Do you speak Azerbaijani?" And I just say, "Yo." So I told him no, but in Azerbaijani. So the stories like that, I've always heard them a million times growing up, but now, like, especially with how the conflict flared up again, I think about that and just what a crazy time that was, and how risky it was for my mom at that moment. But yeah, I mean, thankfully we were able to escape that, and then everything else since then had just seemed so small and compared to stuff like that.
Wow, I think that really kind of paints a really broad and very interesting detailed picture about that point in time, but also kind of, the innocence of a child juxtaposed against this much wider conflict that, you cannot, control in any way. So Julian, we'll go over to you. So you did touch on those inconveniences that you have of being mixed. So if you can give us some insight on that, and then also maybe some positive aspects of being mixed as well in your answer.
Well, I don't have such real life stories. This is here my mother, and on the other picture it's my grandmother, the one from Goris, about whom my mother always says that I got my Armenianness or my Armenian side from her. Inconveniences in the family, it's pretty clear that once there is tension between Armenia and Azerbaijan, there is also tension in the family. Why is that? Because my mother identifies more Armenian, and her brother and my uncle identifies more Azerbaijani. They're in a very good relationship, sister and brother, but when this comes up, there is something not pleasant, and this is an inconvenience. And this inconvenience also it goes kind of down to me, because I'm also perceived in my family as more the Armenian one could say. So And now it gets really, really interesting and really funny, or yeah, you don't expect. But my grandma, who is actually Armenian from Baku, she sympathizes with the Azerbaijani side way more than my grandpa. That's now that's the thing. And then it gets really, really tense with me and her, because she sees in me somehow, I don't know, the grandson of her mother, and then she just says, yeah, you're so one-sided, and I'm also like fighting against that, because actually I've tried throughout my whole life not to be one-sided, because inconveniences, when this happens, then I have more Armenian context than Azerbaijani context, for the reasons which I already gave. Like there are simply family issues, and in such a way I met more Armenian people. Also, I also met more Armenian people in Germany, which is again because, well, there are Azerbaijani groups, really student groups, and there is they're rather political, and I did not really want to be involved in that. And now, as maybe some of you have heard, there are also scandals with German politicians getting money from Aliyev and such stuff, and I also know that those circles were involved in that, so I am now quite happy that I haven't involved. And so, but that also leads to the fact that I know more Armenians. And then when such a conflict starts, and when one tries to take a stance which is diplomatic, which is both-sided somehow, which is empathic, then it gets again tense with the Armenian friends. So you're hated by the one, you're loved by the other, and opposite. And this is a bit difficult to bear over a certain period of time. But there are the positive aspects, and the positive aspects are simply for me that I see that it can work. I experienced that. People can be married, people can be friends, and it works, and I know that, and nobody can deny that, because I am here and I can tell you that it is so. I'm also open. I'm open to information which will give me the full picture about any historical or political affair or fact aspect. And I think that when people are full Armenian and even live in Armenia, and that's what my relatives are, they are not, because they're living in a totally different atmosphere. They're identifying totally differently, and they're simply not open to this particular piece of information, which would make them think, but they cannot, they don't want, because they are where they are. And that's something which, of course, I don't have, and that again is that is good. That is positive. That is a real blessing for me. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Julian. I wish we had more grandmas like yours, who, first of all, open-minded, and trying to be balanced and within the family. And I like how she confronted you. Actually, my deep respect to her. Now we're gonna move to the most recent events, and the unpleasant, of course, especially for you guys. I know how I cannot imagine how tough it was on you, because you have roots in both ethnic groups. But could you please elaborate how the most recent, in general, how the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict impact you, and especially the most recent experience? What perceptions do you have of it in general, and how it affected you? Marat, you go first.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. So, usually I'm not, I hate saying that it's impacted me, because the real impact has been on the people that live there, that have been displaced, or people that have died, or people that had their loved ones go into the war. That's the real impact, right? I'm only tangentially connected to the conflict. I'm just a guy who happens to be half and half. But in terms of what things that's changed, I always talk about how my experiences with Armenians has been positive, and I've never felt any type of way about sharing that I'm half Azerbaijani, even here in LA. But when the war started, this was probably the second week of this recent war. And so one very common thing that happens to me here in LA is I live in a particularly Armenian area, and I'll go into say an Armenian bakery or an Armenian pizzeria or anything. And because I look Armenian, they'll just instantly greet me in Armenian, and then I'll apologize and say, I'm sorry, I don't speak Armenian, Russian or English. And then they'll ask me, how come? And so I get into my background. And anyway, that's always been what happens. And so in the second week of this war, I go into an Armenian pizzeria, and the same thing happens. And I'm just on autopilot. I've had this conversation thousands of times, so I just go ahead and say it. And I was like, oh shit, in my head, because I was like, maybe this was not the right time to get into that. And no, I mean, it was still fine. I mean, he ultimately said, just spread awareness about the war. I mean, ultimately, Armenians, they're kind and decent, and they'll give you respect if you show respect. It's that it shouldn't be surprising, but I guess it even still is as to how that conversation went. But anyway, I think the impact of the war on somebody like myself is to reevaluate how we want our countries to succeed. It's you think about, do you want the country to modernize and prosper in a real way, to thrive economically, or to be politically and democratically free, to raise the standard of living for its people? Or do we want to just cling on to nationalistic quests to one-up each other in every conceivable way, whether it be in territory or displacement of people, or the petulant mudslinging that goes on online? Do we want to have a country where teenagers that are in school now are thinking, okay, well, when I'm 18, I'm very likely going to be in the military and seeing armed combat? So I don't think that's a recipe for successful countries. I think it's a recipe for an entire generation that grows up thinking, okay, how am I going to immigrate out of here? So I just want I want the war to put this conflict into perspective. It's for both countries, since the year 2000, both countries' ruling parties gained legitimacy by virtue of this conflict. You see it in Armenia with Grigoryan in the early 2000s, and the same thing with Ilham Aliyev coming into power in Azerbaijan. That conflict was the building block to both countries turn into the bad regimes that they had. So I just want both countries to do well, and to do well by being part of a tide that raises all boats. An issue here is that this conflict is very much treated like a zero-sum game, where the only way we succeed is if those guys completely fail into oblivion, and that is the only way we can do well. That's a very medievalist way of thinking. The rest of the world is modernizing and globalizing and becoming more interconnected, and I want to see this part of the world join in on that.
Now, this is going to be more, and feel free not to answer it, Marat, but did you ever, throughout the conflict, especially the second conflict, because you were, you're already adult, did you discuss it in the family, or was it like a taboo to discuss it within the family?
Oh, no, it's not taboo at all. There's no nationalistic issues within my family. And in fact, my dad probably discusses it too much every minute of every day. But my dad is very personally affected by the conflict, because his father was born in Artsakh, like I mentioned, and the village where he was born is, the new borders that have been drawn out? That line basically runs through that village now. So for him, it was, on a personal level, important that that village stays Armenian. So he's been affected on a lot more of a deeper basis than say myself, where I just really want the countries to move forward, to have have an agreement on terms of what land belongs to who, because if we're just going to continue disputing this square kilometer, this border marcation, this is just going to go on and on and on and on in perpetual uncertainty. But for my dad, he has that personal connection where he was distraught because of where that village fell, and because for him, the Artsakhi identity is almost preeminent to the Armenian one. That he's very connected to that area. As for my mom, she's not particularly nationalist. Same thing. She would just want the countries to do fine. It wasn't very important for her that Azerbaijan won this land back, or that this was, made even, or that they had this victory.
Thank you, Marat. Julian?
Well, how was I? Well, it was horrible, let's say so. I was particularly shaken by the brutality of the conflict, which sadly also was widespread through all the social media, Telegram, and so on. And I have really, I'm not living in an Armenian area, as we in Germany don't have Armenian areas at all. So I'm kind of more or less detached from Armenians and Azerbaijanis likewise, apart from family. And normally don't spend so much time also thinking about my identity, about Armenia, about Armenians, about Azerbaijan and Azerbaijanis. And at this moment, when such a conflict is there, you're suddenly pushed or pulled back, kind of. You feel pulled back. You're constantly there. You're constantly involved. This conflict, I can say it openly, I was really, I felt that Armenia is under. I felt that the Armenians, not Armenia, the Armenians are under attack, and that's how I felt, and was really mad. And it's also a reason why I'm now here, because I do think that after all, what matters is that people speak with each other, and that both sides can speak with each other. In my family, as I already said, it immediately led to tensions, not between my grandparents, as one would expect, but on other lines. They both are on more or less one page what concerns that. Marat has stressed the inner political perspective, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, and what I would like to stress, and what I also suffered, or what made me suffer, was the outer political perspective. Actually, I felt that Turkey is having a great interest. I felt that the Russians are having great interest. The Iranians, as it seems, not so much in this time. But it made me suffer that exactly because of some, because Erdogan now wants to fulfill some of his dreams or promises. Now this is happening, and the same as Russia to also influence a development inside Armenia is acting in a specific way, but on the other side, what I also know is that it would make stuff better if nobody openly intervened helping one side. This is what happened, I suppose, in both conflicts, once on the Armenian side, now on the Azeri side. Me personally, we could see a wave of aggression from Turkish people here in Germany when the conflict was on peak. I cannot say that I personally felt now in danger, which has to do with the fact that I'm not 100% involved, and look at my surname. Well, it's neither Azerbaijani nor Armenian surname. It's my father's Jewish surname. But of course, it is intimidating, and just glad that it's a different situation now. For me, it's always easier to judge. I'm here in Germany. I'm not there. Yeah, that I also must say. I'm here in a very privileged situation, both from my mixed ancestry and from my location simply. But what made me feel very sad, of course, is this that we lost again from 30-40 years. That's what I feel about it, honestly. In school times I've written like some kind of bigger high school work on the conflict, and was thinking a lot about it, and it was also the first and biggest time I was somehow involved with it before the war now. And I thought, give it time. You know, there's the generation which was directly involved in the war, which was directly fighting, and they will get old, and the new generation will come, and this new generation, maybe they will not want it anymore, and peace is always better. Like a bad peace is better than a good war, and this we lost, because there's now a new generation which has exactly the same, and this of course is of course a rather sad result, but yeah, that's why we're here.
Thank you for both of those answers. We'll go ahead now and move on to the final question, and we think we're going a little bit over on time, but we'll go ahead with this one and hopefully end on a more positive note. So by having personal insight into both cultures, what do you both think the other side can learn from each other? And what is your view on coexistence? So I know that we've kind of been talking about coexistence the entire time, but kind of to sum up your views about maybe what Armenians can learn from Azerbaijanis, and Azerbaijanis can learn from Armenians, and how can we fuse these cultures? What can we take away from both of them? So Marat, you can go first.
Right. So I'll answer the second question first. That's a nice picture. In terms of coexistence, coexistence won't be soon, and that's okay. Over time, it will come. I know we live in the moment, and we, for people that are experiencing it, they feel like, you know, this is about as bitter and hateful of a conflict that's ever existed, but it's really not. And I don't mean to say that to diminish what's happened in this conflict. It's just the history, or the story of world history is long, and it's had a lot of terrible events, and things happen, but the world keeps spinning, and eventually countries move on for the sake of the success of their own country. You know, Germany's had territory disputes as well. You know, Julian, you know, I'm sure you're aware since you live there, but at some point they had to let go of Alsace and Lorraine and northern Poland and the Sudetenland if they were going to move forward as a country and prosper in the way that they have. But normalization of relations is not going to be led by people like myself or Julian. And that I don't mean us as individuals, I just mean people like us in the diaspora. Normalization can't be led by people who have nothing to lose or nothing to gain by a normalization of relations. We live in the West. We, in fact, people in the diaspora probably see it as something to lose because it hurts their own nationalistic ego by the idea of not normalizing relations. The normalization will be led by the people, the citizens of those countries who recognize the benefits of doing that. There are no benefits for us in the diaspora. Well, there might be some, you know, if you're doing business or whatever, but it's going to be the business leaders of those countries who see the benefits in working together. It's going to be the parents of those countries who want their kids to be able to pursue their dreams or marry their sweetheart or study in university and not have to have the cloud of an impending war be hanging over them for the sake of the country's national ego. So that's the process that'll happen there for the countries to normalize. It won't happen tomorrow. It won't happen next week. May even take more than a decade, or you know, in our children's lifetime. But it'll come at some point. In terms of what Armenians and Azerbaijanis could learn from each other, I'll try to speak to each side. What I've seen online is that these are two communities that don't know that much about each other, actually. This goes to when I was speaking earlier, how they're very insulated. These are two sides that have had a steady diet of their own narratives. and not had any sort of counters to it. And now, they're unable to really step out of their own narratives. But basically, I would like to see some sort of movement in terms of understanding each other. For Armenians, I'd like Azerbaijanis to understand the existential dread that goes with being Armenian. As Armenians, when we were young, we learn about the long history of Armenia as just an ancient people that have been here from a very long time ago. When you learn about the great empires of antiquity, like the ancient Persians, ancient Greeks, and the Romans, Armenia was there and had a seat at that table. So when we learn about that, and then we look at Armenia on the map now and compare it to the recent history, as in the last 100 years, the beginning of the 20th century, there's a collective chip on our shoulder in terms of how we perceive the trajectory of where our existence has been going. So I'd like to see a bit more sensitivity or understanding when Armenians are accustomed to thinking the worst when it comes to war, when it comes to territory disputes, when it comes to their position between the countries that they're in between. Now, for Azerbaijanis, there is this narrative that is used to belittle them in this conflict. Even though it has nothing to do with modern geopolitics, there's a cope that's used that Azerbaijanis aren't really a real people. They don't really have, they're lacking in their own history or their own culture. I'd like for that to just be done away with. It's the wrong way to go because it's ahistorical and it doesn't win Armenians any sympathy from outside observers. So there's it's not to say that every grievance is equal. I know everyone's always afraid of the moderation fallacy or equating both sides. It doesn't matter. Everybody has the right to take a position in this conflict. I certainly have my own position in this conflict, but we can take steps to understand each other, to be able to talk about it. Even in this platform, it's okay to take a position as long as you don't belittle the other side's history or you don't deny it. So I'd like to see platforms where Armenians and Azerbaijanis are able to understand each other, because as it stands right now, it doesn't seem like that is the case. They're very content with only elevating the worst takes from the other side. And then when there are people that are open to dialogue, that's shut down and said, oh no, well, I don't trust you because I saw so-and-so nationalists say this, and this is probably how you feel too.
Thank you, Marat. I think you really captured some of the things that we've all kind of seen online being involved in the discourse of the conflict. So I definitely agree with a lot of those points that you made. And Julian, if you could go ahead and give us your final answer for this final question, and then we'll move on.
I have now this difficult task to. Those are on the left are my grandparents. Here we have my mother with my grandmother. Just to describe, I have now the difficult task of find a positive ending, which I will manage. Yeah, what could they learn from each other? Well, I don't know whether one can generalize in such a way and say that Armenians should learn this and Azerbaijanis should learn that. There is, of course, this narrative which I heard often in my family, as rather as an accuse that like Armenians do think that they are superior and Azerbaijanis are just like, I don't know. This is basically what Marat also now said in other words, and those things are intertwined, those narratives, and they do exist, as I now learned in this conflict was from the Armenian side. And those were those moments when I thought, you are indeed both-sided, and that's just not productive. So if Armenians can learn something, then it's certainly that the pride of the history is not leading us in the future. It isn't. It cannot. This is again very easy to say for somebody who lives outside and has such a mixed heritage as I, and a bit more difficult for an Armenian in Armenia. But I just think that focus on the past is not productive. It will not lead to a good future. Armenians also now, of course, have this difficult task when this all ended, this war now, this current, I thought, okay, 1-1, one could say 1-1. Now it would be the wisest for everybody to just stop and to just leave the arms and to stop the attacks. And it's 1-1, and that means that now we're more equal, and now one shouldn't do the mistake and start another war, because there are plenty of those narratives in Armenia, especially now in the last political weeks. That was a topic, yeah. It was military rhetoric, which I think is absolutely not needed, and which will not bring anybody anywhere. Azerbaijanis will have the very difficult task to keep the current state Turkey with Erdogan out of the conflict as much as possible, because Erdogan Turkey is seen as an existential threat by Armenians, and rightfully seen as a threat because of the rhetorics which is used in Turkey. I think both countries will have to keep outside actors outside stakeholders as much as possible out, because only that will help them coexist. And what I have seen and what is positive is that the diaspora is way less helpful in this than the people who are really there. From one point of view, they are, of course, in their microcosmos, in their atmosphere, be it in Armenia and Azerbaijan. On the other side, they know that those people there are real people, and for the diaspora, it is somehow many people in the diaspora do need to reassure themselves of their mostly Armenian roots by being very, very denying and rude, and this I don't see in Armenia and Azerbaijan. That like one knows that those people are real, one has met them. Of course, there's a lot of propaganda, and that's why I think that democratic development is needed in both countries, especially in Azerbaijan. It cannot be politically beneficial to create an atmosphere of hate. That just cannot be. But I think that now, as Marat said, coexistence will not be now, but it might be once, and I think it's possible. And I think that now is exactly a point to start, because now there has been injustice in the 90s, and there has been injustice now, and for the other side justice. And I would say this is really the 1-1 situation, when one could stop, and when one could develop first for oneself, and then maybe later together. Because sometimes I think from outside, here in Germany, the people are so, actually, after all, in the end of the day, they are so similar in many things. Not only speaking about outer appearance, they're so similar. Like when they are in Germany, then they will speak to each other and not to the random German. And Armenians and Azerbaijanis are way more connected than Armenians and Swiss people or Spanish people. And this it's so ridiculous to see that. And of course, that's why I think that coexistence can be possible. Yeah, unless somebody manages to make it a religious conflict, which I really hope will never happen, but which there is potential. If that is not the case, and if one keeps the people, the actors from outside away as much as possible, coexistence will be possible. Yeah.
So thank you, Julian, for your answer. And I definitely, as a Jew from the region, from a neighboring territory, I definitely echo a lot of those sentiments of like, everybody is so similar from this region, very, lots of overlap in music, in culture, in food, right? Even amongst, even the religious divide. I mean, it's a very religiously diverse region. So, as a Westerner, you really want to see people to be able to overcome this, but unfortunately it's not the case, but we can at least build some dialogue as we are doing today. So I'll go ahead and move into the portion and invite Arnold on to kind of go through some of the chat.
Thank you everyone for staying with us for more than an hour. Now we are going to move on to the Q&A session. So we already have a couple of questions sent to us. So if Katie is here, Katie has a question.
I think she has written the question, and I think she's busy. You might just want to read the question, or I can read it.
Sure. Yeah, she wrote a few in a few places. So Katie's question, sometimes people say that the, in quotes, stronger allegiance, so to speak, depends on which parent is which ethnicity. Do the panelists think that there is any truth in this?
There might be. For myself, I mean, having my dad be Armenian means I have an Armenian last name. Part of it is also their personality. I think my dad, his academic background was in history, and I would not say I had a nationalist upbringing. If anything, he always took the line that you know, it's important, you have to know your own history, but it's not enough to just know that. You have to know the history of the people around you to understand how you fit into that. But nevertheless, because he came from a history background, he was more invested in talking to me about my heritage. And he's just somebody that's more engaged with that than my mom was. My mom tends to be more of like a pan-Caucasus identity. So she would talk about it, but it wasn't like very narrowly from a narrowly Azerbaijani point of view. So maybe, I mean, maybe it does depend on which parent. I think in my case, it was more about the personality that each of my parents had.
Julian, do you have anything to add?
Well, of course it shapes, like, of course it has an influence. Which parent influences you in which way. And for me, really, the more I think, there might have been, firstly, there was always said the Armenian side is underrepresented. And secondly, there was also the family issue simply with the people in Azerbaijan. So there's absolutely no connection to Azerbaijan in our family, like no connection to the relatives, because they're not in a very good relationship, or to say it openly, they're in a very bad relationship. But it's, again, my grandpa and his family, and we of course have a better relationship to Armenian relatives, and that of course also shapes, like, yeah, one can't also say it otherwise, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Julian. So now, moving on to the next question, is Jian here, if I'm pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We are having a heat wave in Seattle, and so.
Oh,
anyway,
I heard
Marat,
about that, Janine.
Yeah, you may have heard this.
My parents are baking right now.
It is epic. So it feels more like summer in the region, certainly. Well, thank you again to the speakers and the organizers for having such a wonderful discussion. And my question is essentially what I put in the chat. And I know that both of you have spoken a bit about your families, but I would be interested to hear, if you're comfortable sharing, about how your relatives, perhaps more distant relatives, you know, maybe cousins, people that you are in touch with, maybe more on social media, have like what are the conversations that you've had with them, particularly in this past year, and how have those conversations evolved, if they have, and are your relatives, again, perhaps more distant relatives, impacted by the fact that your families are mixed and do have these unique histories? And so I would be grateful to hear any of your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. So my family, this is an area where I'm jealous of my wife because she has like a million aunts and uncles and a million more cousins, and they all live here within 1 square mile of each other in LA. My family is very different. I was an only child. My parents pretty much are my family, and my grandma when she was alive. The rest of my extended family is kind of scattered all over the world. My Armenian side, I really don't have any relatives that are in the Republic of Armenia before or now. So because they were all in Baku, they had all left just like we did. So I have, some family in Moscow. I have some family in Europe. I have a few cousins that are scattered here. The thing is, none of them are like first cousins, like say how my wife has, where her first cousins are like her sisters. They're, one of her best friends. So because of that distance, we keep up familial relations, but we aren't that close to where we're checking in with them every single day, or that we're discussing this. My mom's side, my uncle, she has a brother. So my uncle lives, he pretty much splits time between Moscow and Baku. That I would say is the relative that she talks to the most. Of course, it's her brother. And he's very much like her. He's not nationalist. And he also, I think part of that is influenced by the fact that he spends time outside of Baku. So he recognizes that there's more to life than winning these wars for just a little bit of nationalistic pride, but remaining using that as a diversion away from the poor standard of living in the country. So as for the rest of her family, my mom has visited Baku 2 times in my life. Unfortunately, she's been the only one able to go. My dad and I won't go. She went twice. One was when her mom passed away in Baku. Another time was, just to go and visit her brother. But she certainly has a lot of relatives still over there in Baku, just not ones that she keeps up with very often. If I was to take a stab at it, I would wager that yes, they are nationalist. They probably don't have good feelings about Armenians. That's just my guess, but the conversation really does not reach there very often in terms of the relatives that we keep in touch with. Thank you for the question, and I'm so glad C-Town's in the house from multiple people here.
Thank you.
I'm gonna follow up Paul's question. Did your mother have her maiden name on it? Is that how she was able to travel to Azerbaijan, or did she have Gulieva
Yes.
or Grigoryan?
So she never took on my father's last name, and this worked to her benefit when there wasn't any particular thing about it, but it just didn't happen. And then once the conflict started, it was just like, okay, it was probably best that happened. So that's how we were able to travel back and forth often. That's how she's able to travel there now. But yes, she's always kept her Azerbaijani last name.
Just for your information, my mom is married to Azerbaijani, and she didn't take his last name too. So, independent Azerbaijani woman.
Yeah.
Julian, you want to add something to Jian's question about?
In my family, there was always this narrative that the Armenian women never took the name of the husband because neither my grandma nor her mother did. Well, yeah, for me, my cousin is my uncle is half, and her mother is also half Azerbaijani. So my cousin, in the end of the day, has a bigger share Azerbaijani, and she also had her grandmother who passed away last year there, and so she was also simply a lot of time in Azerbaijan and identifies certainly rather Azeri than Armenian, certainly. And of course, with her, we had one or the other talk, and it was also not always those are easy talks, but I think they were also helpful for me. Yeah, well, how to say? I also then have my mother's cousins who are all in Yerevan, and especially with one with whom I'm in very good relation, and whom I also have showed around in Berlin and stuff. And of course, I see there the total Armenian point, like the Armenian viewpoint, you know, and I feel empathic, and at the same time, I know like this, it won't work out. Yeah, like this, it won't work out. I understand that this is how it must feel when you are in Yerevan and surrounded by Armenian media and Armenians and everything. But I know that this is not the way how it will go. And yeah, what to say? Yeah, that's all I can basically say. Maybe if you have, if you can specify, I can say something more, but that's my experience with that. Yeah.
That's good enough. Thank you, Julian. Is Armina here to ask her question herself?
Yes, I'm here. Hi,
Lauren.
how is everyone? My question is really for, I guess for both of you. Marat, you said when you moved to LA, Armenians did not necessarily have a problem with your background and they accepted you just like everyone else. And I remember recently there was a Turkish traveler that went to Armenia in March, and he traveled around and told people he was Turkish, and people were like, oh, okay, you know, that's cool, and didn't really give him a problem. So my question is, how do you, and of course there are certain people in the diaspora and who found that quite shocking, and other people that, you know, from the other side said that it's, you know, wow, how can Armenians not have a problem with the Turk, or how can Armenians not have a problem with an Azerbaijani? So my question is, it's of perceptions. So what is yours, well, as Julian's perception of the other side? Like, was it, you know, shocking to, like, let's say the Azerbaijani people that you knew, or the community that you knew, that Armenians were accepting? And how do Armenians themselves, in your interaction with them, perceive the other side in accepting them? So it's not of like the acceptance, right? I understand, you know, your situation. I understand the situation of this Turkish traveler in Armenia. My question is more of perception. How do Azerbaijanis, in your view, think that Armenians will accept them? And how do Armenians believe that Azerbaijanis will accept them? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thanks.
So the thing about this is that both people are largely accepting. I would say online discourse poisons things so badly that when you come on, I mean, last episode of Bright Garden, I still had a great point. She mentioned how people that she knows personally in real life, that she noticed the way that they were posting online was not necessarily indicative of how they really were. But when you come into the community, to this online community, you see that this is the language that's being spoken, and suddenly you feel inclined to join in on it. This is another sort of evolutionary aspect of humans. We tend to conform, and that's all of us, because it's just simply a smarter survival strategy to be one with the pack rather than to veer off on your own. So when people would jump in to the online discourse, that's the language they see, that's the language they join in on. My experience, and I know that maybe Arno has seen something similar, I know other people have, is that people are a lot nicer in private on DMs than they are in public on their timeline. So I'll very often get like just someone who you know, their timeline is just the most vile, like hateful shit, and you know, from an just totally nationalist. And then in private on DM, they'll be like, "Oh, hey, I had Armenian neighbors back in Baku. They were so nice." It's just like, what? But yeah, I mean, I think people are largely accepting. It's just so easy to join in on the lowest hanging fruit, which is, you know, the hateful speech, or just broadly generalizing the other side because it makes you feel, I don't know, sometimes it's very difficult for people to deal with the fact that this is a two-sided conflict, a war between two sides. It's so much easier to frame everything as good versus evil, oppressor versus oppressed. They're the bad guys, we're the good guys, and so once you go from there, the language that follows is very easy to jump into. But yeah, I mean, each side equally has people that are very skeptical about it. They either feel like you have some kind of ulterior motive for facilitating dialogue. Sometimes people will be like, so why do you want to do this? What's your goal? Why do you want us to be friends? Why do you feel like we should move on from our pain? So everybody always thinks I'm some like sleeper agent from the other side, but I'm really not. But in any case,
swear that you're not.
What was that?
Can you please swear that you're not?
Yeah, I swear. I would have to, once you ask me, I have to say it just like a cop. But the thing is, the people are largely accepting. My experience with people in DMs or in private is so much more vastly different than the performative virtue signaling that they often have to do when the other people from their side are around, and they can be perceived as giving in or being open to dialogue. So what I would say is appearances are very deceiving. Most people are very normal and accepting of it.
Thank you, Marat. And yes, I have to agree on that people in private tend to be so much different. Some people, I mean, people who just constantly insult you or, repeat the same talking points. Suddenly I've had them DM me and say, oh, share this video about like Armenians and Azerbaijanis, being friendly or saying nice things to me. So it confuses me sometimes why they would be like that on the public platform, which you would think it would be the opposite. But Julian, yourself.
To answer to that, I think many people want to reassure themselves that they are part of a collective, and I don't know, I think it's comforting for most of the people, I would say, that they are part of some collective which generally and will not let them down. And in the moment when you are kind of part of this collective, but you are somehow showing sympathy for another collective, then you risk not to be accepted by the others and to be let down by yours. And that's a very difficult situation for the people, and that explains a bit why there's this outside and this inside, because most people are, most humans are normal humans, and they don't want, I don't know, they're not brutal. And yeah, well, about that, I fear to I don't know, repeat myself or something, but I have had very, very different meetings with people who either accept it or not. And also honestly, on the Jewish side, I must say, like, once I met somebody who was Palestinian, and I said, and then he asked me where I'm from, and I also have this appearance, like, thought I might be like, might also speak Arab or something. I explained a bit, my father is Jewish. That was absolutely awkward. He was like, he was like, okay, let's stop speaking and let's not even try to become friends ever, And I found it again very, very sad, because here we kind of, he might have his reasons in trauma, yeah? but one can distinguish politics and human relation. And then I had a meeting with a Turkish grandpa in the cafe drinking his tea in Berlin, who asked me and my cousin about we were smaller, where we are from, and of course whether we're Turkish. And I was like, no, it's a bit more complicated. And then he was like, oh, politics is politics, this is all politics, like, we're all humans, and this was like such a nice, and it's like over 10 years ago, and it's such a nice meeting. It stays forever. And this conflict, I hope, like, oh God, hopefully he's not now, I don't know, hopefully he didn't get too much Erdogan, like, in the last years, and now is like thinking absolutely differently and all that. It's all about your bubble, I'd say.
And just touching on Armenia's written original question. So I don't know if you've had any experience in the other side seeing you be accepted by your other part of your community, like where you live. So how do they perceive that? For example, you being accepted by Armenians, or you being accepted by Azerbaijanis, or even your other identities.
If you are mixed Jewish, Armenian, Azeri, then it's not the terms you're thinking, I would say. Like you're accepted by many, and at the same time, fully, you're also not part of them. You know? And it's okay. I learned to live with that. And again, this has something to do with collective, like with the collective thinking, and then again, also I would say that the most, I don't know, the positive perception is mostly based also on whether we got socialized in the same place or not, you know, like if somebody grew up in somebody with some migration history grew up in Germany, maybe he will be from Albania, let's say, or from Kosovo. We have absolutely nothing in common in terms of history and language, but we will very well connect. And some Armenian from Armenia who is, I don't know, nationalist and who always was in Yerevan, we will not understand each other. Like, I think it's very much about socialization. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Julian.
I hope this went a bit closer to the question. But yeah,
it was, yes, very relevant. Thank you, Julian. Is there anyone else who has a question in the audience?
Could I add or like ask something before we wrap up?
Of course.
Julian, you kind of mentioned something, and when you both were talking about how during this last war, just kind of being like reminded of like this own question of your identity, or that topic is kind of coming back up again, because now it's like you have to pick a side, and it's a clear side now. And you said it was like this constant pullback. And personally for me, like that's how I was, because I live in Los Angeles, and that's how I felt, because everywhere you would go, I'm Armenian, so I would see, like, let's say like an Artsakh flag, or just kind of hearing certain things, like people walking by in the market saying Qarabağ, just like something like that randomly. So it was almost like everywhere I was going, I'm being reminded of not only like what my own identity, but just what is happening. And it's like you have your own personal like way of approaching the conflict, or your own opinions, but there's now this narrative maybe that's trying to be pushed onto you almost sometimes, and it really does feel like a pullback. It's like this constant tug of war. So I hated that like during this last war, because I didn't want to go out. Like I would avoid Glendale, Burbank. Like I just did not want to like see anything, because it was like a struggle. Like I don't want to kind of like play into this basic like the narrative that the masses are kind of just like talking about or using. But yeah, it was a very weird back and forth. So when you said that, it just kind of resonated with me. And the whole question of just like identity is very interesting with, for I think both of us, like Armenians and Azerbaijanis, like it's just a very interesting topic.
There's a very good quote from Marcel Reich-Ranitzky. He was a literature critic in Germany. He was a Polish Jew, survived concentration camp, and then he was asked something again about his identity, and he said, you know, I'm a Jew mostly when there are anti-Semites around, but those anti-Semites, they pull you back. Like you are just a human, and you talk, and you are interested in literature, or you do environmental law, and you are in Germany or in Los Angeles, and they pull you back. What's your stance? And you have a stance. You cannot not. You have this history. Yeah, it's like you cannot deny it. You cannot just. It doesn't work, and that's why I'm sometimes envious of people who don't have all this complex background. But you know, I'm just bubbling. Yeah, it is interesting, and it's a blessing in the end of the day.
Can I add some? Can I add something?
Go ahead.
About the previous question, and you know, when you ask, the general conversation or general rhetoric on both sides is that the other side is bad, right? And then when there's a personal contact, in most of the cases, we see that there is milder or more understanding approach, right? So I think that's very telling about the situation, is that the nationalism on both sides are built on anti-Armenian or anti-Azerbaijani. So it's not about nationalism or patriotism. It's about hating the other side, as it was before the World War II between Germany and France. You know, Germany's nationalism were built on anti-France and the vice versa. And then when there's no human contact, as what happened after 90s, we are facing the situation that we're facing now. Marat was saying something, and Julian wants to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, as I mentioned, I've always been very comfortable speaking about being both Armenian and Azerbaijani. Now, I mean, I wasn't on Glen Oaks Boulevard with on one side of our Armenian flag and another side an Azerbaijani flag, and just, I'm not trying to get into people's faces with it or piss anyone off, but I've always been very comfortable when I'm asked. And the thing about the war, just as Andrea mentioned, things are a little different now. I know that whenever it's brought up, the following question is going to be my stance on the war or my thoughts on it. And so, you know, I'm not looking forward to that, but I know that's what's going to happen. So it's you know, the war, it brings it into context of it reminds everyone to take a side. You know, you can no longer be just mixed as you were before.
Thank you, Marat. Ilkin, you have your hand up. You want to say something?
Yes, thank you very much. Just a minute. All right. So thanks a lot for this discussion. It was very interesting. My question is, it can't be sound a bit weird because I do not have any mixed background. I am fully from Şamaxı, and I'm glad that you are to some extent from also Şamaxı. And my question is, it seems that you are even more interested in the conflict in Karabakh issue than me as an Azerbaijani citizen. And my question is, I try to understand your motivation as self-interest understood in a very, very, very narrow sense, not just a psychological relief that people from your parents' region live well and coexist together. But like, would you be interested in visiting the region once all this is over and you can move to Azerbaijan, even though your surname is Grigoryan or something like that? So are you really interested in investing in the region, in the sense moving here and knowing it more better, or because I find it very fascinating that you are interested in this region, that you are only related to your parents. I don't have the same feelings towards the original place of my parents. That's why I'm trying to understand. Is it just psychological relief, or is it really, to some extent, in your interest, in self-interest, understood in a very narrow material way? Thank you.
I love this question because now we're getting down to like real philosophical, like, does anything even matter? Yeah, when you say move there, you mean, I assume you mean just visit, right? I absolutely would like to visit. As non-nationalist as I am, I'm extremely fascinated with my own cultures and origins. That is, you know, comes to me from my father, who knows everything about Armenia inside and out. And you know, I've just projected that to both sides of my ancestry. But yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who grew up very interested in history and different world cultures. And I, even though I've grown up in the US, I've always felt a connection to where I'm from, and also, of course, wanting them to do well. And so sorry, I'm outside, so there's just like flies all around. Because because of my interest in that sense, I couldn't help but always follow the progress of this conflict in that way. And yeah, I mean, from what I know, you're, I don't know if it's informed by your own personal philosophy. I mean, I follow you on Twitter. I don't know if it's just a lack of interest in a national sense for you, but as silly as I find nationalism, I can't help, but still have a closeness and connection to where I'm from in a personal level. Part of it might be because I'm not allowed or not able to go there, or I haven't been to Armenia yet, you know, so maybe there's a forbidden fruit aspect to it, but I think that'll always be within me. Thank you for the question, though. Great question.
Julian, yourself?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. A weak point, I would say. I mean, without the Karabakh conflict, my family's history would be a different one, fully, and especially in the 90s, and also with the result that maybe nobody would have come to Germany, and maybe I wouldn't exist. But that's a different story. But I would say, yeah, it's like it was decisive, this conflict, and that it happened, and in a very, I don't know, it changed everything, and the life for my family wouldn't have been the same if there was no conflict, or it wasn't exactly in the 90s. And I think nowadays, yeah, of course, like I mean, I don't know whether that was already said, but it's also a point where I'm really not biased, but I actually have never managed to be in the region, neither in Armenia nor in Azerbaijan, and also not in Artsakh. So that's why also, like, I've heard often like, oh, you don't know anything, you haven't been there. That's why I speak also about identity and not about, I don't know, my geopolitical knowledge and so, and my knowledge about of mentality or something. Speak about myself. My girlfriend, for example, is from Latvia, and Latvia has also suffered in the Soviet occupation, as they call it, and has suffered in the world wars, both of them. And I simply see how countries can develop if they don't have those border and those territorial issues, and if they manage to settle, and if they manage to also make compromises, because also Latvia and Russia had territorial issues, but they have a compromise, and the development goals of this region. I'm not speaking only about, I don't know, economic growth or something. I'm speaking really about simply a dignified life for the people there. And the fact that I can now go on the plane, go to Latvia, and enjoy the life there, as also as a EU citizen in my case. And of course, I would be very happy if this same was possible for me to go to Yerevan, than to go on a train and drive. This is honestly my dream. Right? I could go from Yerevan in a train and then go to Baku overnight or something. And this is simply not possible. And this is an illusion by now, an utopia. But I would say this would close a wound. Yeah, a very, very deep one. So that's maybe the reason. Yeah, but I don't have any particular, like, I don't know, interest from my career or my life. It's more like this idea that's always good. Yeah.
To Ilkin's point, what I've observed here is, especially, and even in my own family with my own kids growing up, is that when you're abroad, when you're in foreign countries, some people tend to be more nationalistic than when they're in Azerbaijan. More religious than they're in Azerbaijan. I can't tell about Armenia. So there is that tendency. I don't think that applies to Marat or Julian, but in general, there is that observation.
I'd also like to make a comment, because I think this, when you live in the West, it kind of, regardless of what you're commenting on, if it's something like a international or foreign issue and you have a connection to a particular region, people say, oh, okay, well, you're American, why aren't you just identifying as an American? And I think it's when you're in a country that's, you know, not the region that you're born in, or not the region of your family, often people from outside always remind you that you are not from here, that you are still a foreigner. You know, I look the way that I look, right? I don't look like maybe somebody's typical image of an American, even though that is now changing and that's much more broad. Or my name is my name, my last name is my last name. And so, you know, most of the time people, for example, in my case, people just assume I'm Russian because, and for the North Caucasus specifically, Dagestan is an autonomous republic in Russia. So you can kind of understand why people would make that association. But then to somebody who understands the region, they immediately ask me about what do I think about Chechnya, you know, or even they will ask me about Karabakh because, okay, now they make an association between the Caucasus, or, and then when I say Jewish, what is your opinion on Israel and Palestine, or something like that. So it's like, you're always being pulled, kind of like Julian said, you're always being pulled back, even though in your regular life, you are, you know, living in the West, working in the West, your primary language of communication is, you know, despite I speak Russian, for example, in my household, but so you're always being reminded of the fact that you are not from the place that is actually your newfound home. And I think that kind of plays with you a little bit psychologically as well. So that kind of just to kind of sum up why people who may not be still directly connected to a region in the sense that they live and work there might still have some sort of feelings, because they're almost forced into those feelings by the surrounding people.
Thank you, Lyra.
Great point, Lyra.
You wanted to say something, Marat?
Sorry, I was just interjecting to say great point, Lyra.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So for what should be the last question, let us go to Adam. You have your hand up.
Oh, thanks, Arnold. I won't show my face because I'm dead sick in bed.
Oh,
so
that's
apologies on that. That's all right. But my question is for Marat, and it kind of says the same point as like Gilkin was making, but much more of like a downer point. So sorry, I'm not going to be as upbeat. But Marat, you mentioned like, you know, the people that would want to, you know, that should have an impact on like the reconciliation would be that people that would be most affected by the conflict is the people that would be that have something to gain and also something to lose. And I agree wholeheartedly. You know, that's going to be the you know, that's where all of this has to come from. We can't really do much about it in diaspora, but wouldn't you say, you know, especially from like, say, the perspective of your father, you know, that your father has something to lose in having his, you know, he was concerned about the entire war, making sure that he sees his ancestral village, like the village that he's from, on the same side, because it's like, that was the same thing with me and my dad. We just wanted to make sure that our, you know, our home village, Martuni, like stayed on the Armenian side, not just for, you know, our purposes of wanting it there, but also our families there too. You know, even though we don't have any more stake in the game, we left the country for this very reason, but we still wanted, for personal reasons, like we had something to lose. You don't have to answer. I know it's super personal.
No, that's a great question. Hi, by the way, Adam is my homie. That is a great question, and that's the difficulty. Sometimes I talk to him, you know, of, is it really a matter of what the sovereign government that the village belongs to that's most important, or would it work if those areas were Armenian settled and had a degree of autonomy? And I'm not saying that's the position that I want. I'm just picking his brain, right? To just see, to get at the heart of what's most important for him. But, you know, as it stands now, he's not visiting there anyway. And even when it was, you know, comfortably under Armenian control, he, you know, needed this war to be a reminder of the fact that he never got to visit. So when countries are stable and they're doing well, and there's interstate or international exchange of goods and travel, these sorts of questions of am I allowed to, am I not allowed to, don't come up. These questions only come up when it's all or nothing. Either we will own this and we'll be able to comfortably go there, or, you know, there's a 50-50 shot we won't own this at all and I won't be able to step foot into it. So, you know, for me, I feel like some people measure the country's success as as a measure of the square feet that it occupies. It's a very medieval way of looking at it in my eyes. I'd much rather have a country that's doing well, that's modernized and diversified its economy, rather than like some 13th century agrarian perspective of, okay, well, we have this land and we'll have this land and we have this square kilometer and we have this hill. I know sometimes those things matter from a military perspective and also just from a symbolic nationalist perspective. But for somebody like my dad, you know, where he has a personal connection to it and he would like to just go there and touch the soil and climb up a hill that, you know, his own father and grandfather likely climbed up. That is not a question of sovereign borders. That is a question of just the freedom to be able to come there and do it.
It brings me to a point that there is an insecurity on both ethnic groups, but that insecurity doesn't stem from the physical insecurity. It's more psychological insecurity. That's why, you know, your dad probably didn't visit back then, and now because of the physical insecurity. So that's what we have to provide, the psychological security, so that both nations can coexist.
Julian, you wanted to express your thoughts about what Aram said?
I actually thought the question was only to Marat, so I didn't really get like I would need it either again, or that's how I understood it, just to Marat.
Okay.
If you had thoughts, you know, Julian, you can chime in. That's totally fine. I've liked what you've said this entire time. So, but it was more pointed towards Marat because of what he said earlier.
Okay. Diego, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make like a small comment and maybe a question as well. Because this topic is one of the first topics we wanted to do when we started this project back with Aidan and Arnold many months ago. And we only had Marat, you know, he was like our unicorn, and we were like constantly trying to find the other guest for this meeting. And we were for months looking for another mixed person. Most of them that, you know, the ones that we could find more easily were in Russia, and many of them just Russian speaking. So then, well, luckily Julian appeared in our lives, but just this reflection, I'm just making it because I was just curious if you guys know any other mixed people that, you know, maybe don't necessarily say they're mixed, you know, if they feel more Armenian or more Azerbaijani, they just identify as one, because that happened to us as well. Like we will hear about some mixed people, for example, in Azerbaijan, but they will only identify, you know, they wouldn't like say they're half Armenian, you know, they will just say they're Azerbaijani. So yeah, since you guys are mixed, maybe you have had some experiences meeting other mixed people that, you know, maybe don't identify as, don't openly identify as mixed, so to say.
I'm just being Katie's voice here because she's in the beach. She cannot speak. She says there are a lot of that examples in Seattle, but most wouldn't want to speak publicly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just in Seattle, I knew of definitely 4 people my age that were the same mix. They're probably not as invested or as interested in geopolitics or this conflict for me to reliably trust they'd want to be a part of the project. But you're just letting you know that even in Seattle with our small community, I knew of a few people with the same mix.
I have thought now a bit, and I must admit, I don't know anybody, of course, apart from my cousin. But that also has a lot to do with the fact there's really, like, I suppose in the Armenian community, one won't find somebody who would like to speak publicly about it if there is. And also, I'm not that much connected to neither the Armenian or the Azeri community in Berlin. And they are small. They're small. It's not comparable to the US, and it's not comparable to LA. To LA certainly not. So no, I don't actually. No. But I still didn't imagine that it would be so difficult to find somebody. So I feel very honored, Diego.
Well, there's this German traditional speaker called Elmar Rassi. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's half your mix as well. So
Elmar
Rassi, like
never heard.
We actually reached out to him as well. You know, we reached out to everyone who we found that was helpful.
He was our third unicorn.
Yeah. But no, I mean, question or comment, I just want as well as to thank you guys again, because not only for joining the meeting, but also like for willingly be able to, you know, like say that you're mixed and all of these. For some people, it's not as easy, and or you know, maybe they don't want it. So it actually takes also some bravery from your part. So I wanted to thank that as well.
Yes, you all spoke also very intelligently and with a lot of knowledge of the history and the background. So I think, you know, we ended up finding the right people in that sense, because, you know, perhaps other people are just not as, you know, connected to that information the way that the two of you are. And I think it goes back maybe a little bit to the previous question about why are you speaking about this in the first place, being kind of displaced. It's that maybe you don't necessarily represent all of the mixed people, in the sense that, you know, people are just going about their lives. They're not really allowing the conflict to influence them in that way. But it is an important perspective also to make sure that we are able to hear, and it's hopeful in a lot of ways as well.
All right, so now we have come to the end of our program. I would like to invite Julian and Marat if they have any closing remarks they want to say.
Marat, you were always the first to answer.
No, I feel like I spoke my piece. Follow me on Twitter, Marat Garinovich. I tweet about Armenian and Azerbaijani stuff. Most of it is lighthearted. But thank you to everyone who came. This was great.
Julian?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter. You'll read about German environmental politics, and hopefully not about the conflict, because that's when stuff gets bad. Yeah, Rauf mentioned Germany and France, and that's something which I wanted to mention but forgot to mention, and it's super important because here nobody, I don't know how it's in France, but here nobody has ever imagined before the 50s that there will be not only peace but also real friendship. Like, there are still those jokes on French people, because, you know, French people, I don't know, they fail in war or something. Like, there are many of those jokes. So there is this still, but nobody would ever come to the idea like, yeah, let's get Erzas back, you know. That's a very good idea. Nobody would come to that. And the key was that simply the communication was so good, and Germans can drive there and Germans can buy good cheese there, because apparently in Germany we don't have good cheese. Yeah, this is something which I just wanted to leave here because I think this is very helpful.
Lira, you've done a great job today as a co-host. Do you want to say something?
No, I guess just follow me on Twitter as well if you want. I do get involved in the discussions on the Israel-Palestine conflict as well, but everything is lighthearted and I don't take any particular stances, just want to see more dialogue across all ethnicities, all cultures, and just more understanding. I think in a lot of ways I am against strong nationalism, but we also do have a lot, to be proud of, despite the fact that we all live in the West. We have great food, we have great music, a great literature, and, to just assume that the cultures of the West necessarily, it's a good thing, but it's also great to be able to infuse your own into your newfound homeland. So I definitely want to see a more globalized, a more pluralistic future where we can all just explore each other's nations and each other's cuisines and just be able to, bond over what we have in common. So yeah.
Thank you, Lira. My co-organizers and partners, Diego or Rauf.
I just want to thank everyone who attended, who participated, who asked questions. We really appreciate it. We want to see you guys again in our next meeting, and we'll have our flyer. Lara, special thanks to you for being a perfect co-host, and we'll have you again. And my permanent co-host, thank you again for having me on your team. I really enjoyed.
Thank you both. Thank you all.
Diego.
I already said my part.
Okay.
So thank you all. Once again.
I also want to thank you, Marat and Julian. Very interesting conversations, very interesting perspectives, given your backgrounds. Thank you to our audience. Thanks for everyone who's involved with Bright Garden. I see Lyra, Andrea, Fidan, and more I'm not seeing right now. Thanks to my co-organizers, Rolf and Diego. And last time I even forgot to mention Diego, but he actually has been doing most of the work in organizing and everything, which doesn't meet the eye during the meetings. So thank you, Diego, for keeping everything together most of the time, while I'm a little more unorganized, probably. And thanks to everyone who joined the meeting. So cheers. Follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Bright Garden Voices. You can find us, and hope to see you all next time. Thank you and cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.